Turning Red has struck a fair amount of firsts for Pixar. It's the first feature-length film that director Domichi has been the head of. It's the first Pixar movie to be directed by a woman of color. It's the first Pixar movie to have Ludwig Göransson compose the score. You know, the guy who worked on the music of Black Panther, Fruitvale Station, and Community, Tenet, and a bunch more. Turning Red is a trailblazer in many senses, but ironically, I think the most impactful part of its narrative is how it builds upon the already established ideas and themes of previous Disney fictions. This isn't going to be so much of a review of Turning Red as it will be a discussion of Disney and Pixar's recent narrative explorations of motherhood and generational trauma. There is a massive intersection between psychology and creative writing, and if there's anything I have learned from working in the literary world and having a master's in psychology, it's that some of the greatest opportunities for dealing with our trauma and troubles and pain come from the externalization that fiction allows. For some of you, this might be a topic that hits really close to home. You might have been watching Turning Red and been cringing out of your skin at seeing Ming Lee utterly destroy May's social life. Or you may have been in tears at the reconciliation and understanding at the end of the film. Whichever camp you reside in, whichever emotions you felt across the film's 90 minutes, just know that this narrative on parenting and the consequences thereof was a long time in coming. But to get to what I consider to be its beginning, we have to go back a few years, more than half a decade in fact, to 2016 and Coco. Now, I've made my feelings on Coco very well known. I adore this movie. From beginning to end, it was basically pitch perfect, and to me was the last truly phenomenal Pixar movie released. Miguel's journey with his great-great-grandfather and his family, both living and dead, make for one of the most emotional climaxes I have ever seen in an animated movie. But it's the backdrop to the conflict that I really want to focus on, how things got to be the way they are. And it really starts with Mama Imelda. Her story begins nearly a century before our main character is even born. She's happily married to a loving musician and is raising a beautiful little girl. But like any story, things don't stay perfect, and one day, Imelda's husband leaves with his guitar and never comes back. She never hears from him again. To cope with her heartbreak and anger, she gets rid of everything that reminds her of the husband who left. She throws herself into work making shoes, then teaches her daughter to make shoes, then her son-in-law, then her grandchildren, until the entire family 4 generations down is running a large, successful shoemaking business. On the surface, this comes off as almost an inspirational tale, as a woman overcoming her troubles to create a better life for herself and her children with her own 2 hands. And there are definitely aspects of that. However, as the film goes on, it reveals the deeper implications and issues that Imelda was dealing with. Her pain over losing her husband was so great that she banned music for her entire family. And she did not do it to save them from pain, but to take revenge on her husband. She wanted Hector to be excised from the family. She wanted them to forget everything about him, most of all, her daughter Coco.
I wanted to forget you. I wanted Coco to forget you too.
Imelda's pain and trauma cascaded through the family for 100 years, reaching far past her death and affecting those who had never even met her. Miguel's love of music and his knowledge of his great-great-grandfather were stifled because of Imelda and the pain she let define herself. Miguel had to hide who he was because of the familial culture of shame and outrage surrounding music established by Imelda. Miguel had to fight to just be who he was. And this, of course, ultimately leads to all the conflict we see in the film. Only by the family coming together through Imelda and Hector's reconciliation can they overcome De La Cruz, the central antagonist of the film. Coco is a story about how we remember our family and how those people close to us affect us even after they have gone. As much as it is a story about the transcendent power of love and connectedness, it is also a cautionary tale about how the unaddressed trauma and pain of parents can drastically alter the lives of their children and beyond. It directly deals with the psychological and emotional consequences of trying to forget someone or not talk about someone until the pain goes away, because the pain won't go away. And for whatever reason, Disney seemed to completely latch onto that thematic message and continued its exploration with Encanto. Now, don't get me wrong, so much of Encanto is completely unique to itself. But when you really get down to it, Encanto really appears to be a spiritual successor to the thematic message that Coco set up in its background. Much like Mama Imelda, Abuela's pain and trauma is the source of all the conflict in Encanto. She lost her husband and was left to raise her children on her own, but instead of giving up, she persevered to establish an entire community that centered around her family and the miracle her husband's death provided. But again, much like Imelda, Abuela's pain and emotional turmoil were never actually addressed, which gave rise to continued pain and turmoil for her children and grandchildren. Where Imelda sought to cope with the loss of her husband by completely denying his existence, Abuela is the complete inverse. Her entire life is spent making sure that the miracle that came from her husband's death persists no matter what the cost, because to Abuela, that miracle is all she has left of him. Abuela loves her children and her grandchildren, but she does not see them as individuals, she sees them as pieces of the Madrigal family, a family that exists to be a vessel for her husband's sacrifice. And much like Imelda, when those pieces don't fit into place, Abuela tries to have them forgotten, excised from the family. However, while there are a ton of similarities between Coco and Encanto, there is a massive difference on a narrative level. As stated before, Coco is focused on Miguel's struggle against De la Cruz, the central antagonist for the film. De la Cruz is the reason Hector was murdered, the reason Imelda was left alone, and the present danger for Miguel not being able to return to the real world and keep Hector from being forgotten. While Imelda's personal struggle and heartbrokenness is the basis and backdrop for the familial issues and story events, it is De la Cruz that acts as the major obstacle that the family must overcome to achieve happiness. In Encanto, on the other hand, there is no central antagonist, and that's very rare for any kids movie, especially a Disney one. Antagonists or villains are used as that easy to recognize example for what not to be or what not to do. Having a single character embody all the negatives that the narrative is opposing helps kids to better understand the message at the core of the story. But the absence of an antagonist allows for something so much deeper. It creates a situation in the narrative where no one character is completely in the wrong. It sets the ground for the establishment of gray characters, and it allows the thematic message to become the centerpiece rather than a character. In Encanto, Abuela's trauma and its cascading effects on the family ease the conflict. The film is a close look at how sometimes parents have all the best intentions when leading their family, but as flawed human beings who are dealing with their own issues, they then pass their trauma on in such a way that it becomes normalized and accepted. No matter how we may feel, parents are not always evil, but they are always just people, and the cracks in their heart become deep fissures in the lives of their children. Only by directly addressing Abuela's trauma and unresolved mourning over her husband does the family finally understand why their casita and Encanto have been in danger. They see the pain that has been guiding their lives, all inherited from the matriarch of their family. And from that recognition, they are able to heal and grow closer. Abuela is not a villain. She only ever acted out of love, but that love was often crippled by loss and guided by fear of further pain. And it was that very fear that put into motion the events that almost caused her to lose what she valued so much. And that very theme and message stands at the center of our next fiction of focus, Bao. This was a short film that aired in 2018, just before The Incredibles 2, and depending on which day you catch me on, I might say Bao is the better of the two stories. For those who may need a slight recap, Bao is about a woman who makes Bao, but the twist is that one of them comes to life and she takes care of it as her own son. She loves and cares for this little bond as it grows, but her love slowly becomes the very thing that strains their relationship. Her little Bao is beginning to be independent, and her life is so wrapped up in taking care of him that she struggles to find her place when he no longer needs her. The short film reaches its climax when Bao is about to leave forever, and in her devastation, the mother decides that if she can't have him, no one can, and she eats him. Only after, while seeing this woman emotionally destroyed, do we get the reveal that everything we saw was an allegory for her relationship with her actual son. When he returns home, he and his mother share a moment where they understand and forgive each other. Again, there's no antagonist here. Just characters existing and reacting in their own ways with their own flaws. It's undeniable that this mother loves her child, but that doesn't mean her love can't be selfish and painful. And as bittersweet a message as it is, it's so powerful because so many of us have been hurt by those who were meant to love us. We have scars from our protectors and tracks of tears from those who've taken care of us. That's just how life works. But the answer is not to bury our issues through denial, but to confront our pain so that we may not pass it on. Bao was a phenomenal short film, and it earned an Academy Award for its director, Domi Shi. But this visionary creator wasn't quite done yet, and she went on to craft our last fiction of discussion, Turning Red. This film, in my eyes, is the thematic culmination of everything we have addressed so far. It channels Bao by focusing its first half almost exclusively on the friction that comes from motherly love stifling that burgeoning independence that every child experiences. It showcases the repression of emotion and experiences that unexpectedly come from the best of intentions. Then the second half widens to resemble Coco and how the inherited burdens of one's ancestors can come to define a person's entire life and outlook. And in the climax, the spirit of Encanto comes center stage as instead of a mustache-twirling villain to root against, our antagonistic force is the unaddressed trauma at the center of this family and how it has cascaded for generations to turn these mothers and daughters against each other. And that, I think, is the really unique, compelling aspect of Turning Red. Coco centered on Miguel, but dealt with the broad idea of generational trauma. Encanto centered on Maribel, but really focused on her relationship with her grandmother. Bao was about a mother and her child, but Turning Red was an intimate, multi-generational look at the specific ways that parents, or really mothers, affect their children. Ming is just as much of a main character as Mei, and her relationship with her mother is just as important as Mei's relationship with her. And the relationship between all these women is healed by them openly confronting their inherited trauma, their red pandas, rather than hiding them away. The field of psychology has long been interested in what traits and traumas we inherit from our parents. A field called psychohistory is specifically centered on how destructive parenting can subconsciously dominate an individual's social behavior and how they then raise their own children. A very common psychological coping strategy for trauma is denial and repression, to lock something away so deep that it cannot hurt you any longer. But locked away or not, the weight of that burden still lays heavy on the mind, and the thing I enjoy about each of these films is that their philosophy for success is to confront and unpack that pain that has been locked away. Fiction is our beautiful ability to learn from the life of someone who was created for us. Through the stories we tell each other, we see our own struggles and how we might handle them. Our parents do not define us, nor should they, but their attention towards us, or lack thereof, is part of who we are. Stories that deal with parents are often the ones that touch us most deeply, whether that be BoJack Horseman, Inception, or Full Metal Alchemist. Many of us will never get a Disney-style come-to-Jesus moment with our parents. Some of our parents either don't want to reconcile or are unable to. But these stories are more about the courage to recognize the pain that we have inherited and have been taught to pass on, and having the strength to break the cycle that we've been thrown into. Disney's recent dive into multi-generational storytelling has been some of their most interesting work to date. Is every film that they put out perfect? No. But sometimes perfection in storytelling is not the purpose. Sometimes simply seeing ourselves and our struggles told genuinely and well gives us all we need. Anyway, thank you all for watching all the way until the end. If you like what you heard, make sure to leave a comment, like, and subscribe. If you really want to be a homie, support the channel on Patreon or check out some of my books on my website. I'll leave a link in the description below. As always, it was a pleasure, and I will talk to you all again soon.